income, and sorry about that. Also, income is something else. You're going to want to look at the income prior to the first of the year. Exemptions and other things are also based on the first of the year. So you may have had experience if you bought a single family home and the former owner had homestead on the property, your tax bill may be significantly less than you thought it was. That's because if you bought it subsequent to January 1st, you will enjoy the prior owner's exemption status for whatever that is. So if they had homestead on the property and you bought it January 2nd, you will enjoy their exemption for the rest of the year. Now, next year, you're going to get hit for a different amount, but the exemptions are also set on that first of the year date. New construction too, you want to be aware of if you're finishing a project, or if the project is, if you're demoing a building or a part of a building, that January 1st date, and there's a lot of specifics about this, so you can contact me afterwards if you have questions about it, but the status of the project on the first of the year dramatically can increase or decrease your taxes, depending on what the situation is. So like I said, just values made up two components. And by law, the two components are land and building. You don't want to get too concerned about that. The Florida property appraisers are mandated to consider and assign a value to the land and the building, but there are different jurisdictions, different DCAs. They conflict on this matter. So in Broward, which I think majority of you guys are in Broward, the allocation isn't really as important. And we do use it, and we do argue on allocation. Sometimes we might argue a land component and differently than the building component. But the way the law is in the fourth DCA, they can be wrong on the land, wrong on the building, and right overall. And all the counties kind of do it different. Dade, I don't like how Broward does the allocation, but it doesn't really matter that much because we're just concerned about the overall value. Dade, I think, does it a little better. They'll look at the zoning of the property, they'll look at the land, the various characteristics, account for external obsolescence issues, and they'll do a blanket assessment of the land rate. So everybody that is similarly situated in that particular, doesn't matter what improvements on that land, they will have a specific land rate that's going to be fairly uniform within a geographic area. And then what they'll do, they'll figure out what the depreciated value of the building is, and they'll allocate a portion to the improvement. So allocation is a whole lot more important in Dade than it is in Broward, but just be aware there's some conflict there. And the only thing that matters is the overall value. Taxable value. Taxable value may be different. So it used to be that any commercial property or any property that wasn't homesteaded was assessed at the market value in total. There were no exemptions. There are some exemptions now we'll get into in a minute, but the exemptions are the taxable value. So you've got your market value. And by the way, the school board's always going to tax you at the market value or just value. What you'll see different terms on the trim, but you're always going to pay the school board the higher number of the two. The taxable value, you may pay the other entities less, and that's based on exemptions. Really has a lot to play with homestead, but there's the non-homestead as well we'll get into. And what that is, the 10% cap on the value change. So it came into being in 2028, and basically the school board is about 30 to 40% of your taxes, and the rest are subject to this cap. So municipalities, hospitals, libraries, things like that, they're going to tax at a lower rate if you've been in this property for a while. As I said before, if you bought the property and they had a non-homestead cap, when you bought it, you'll enjoy that for that year, but it resets on any kind of title change or anything of that nature. If you improve the property substantially, that cap goes away. It also creeps. So if your value, the just value is $1 million and you're paying taxes on 900,000 because you've had it for a year, the next year, let's say nothing changes and the market value is still $1 million, it will creep up to the market value. It creeps up every year, similar to how homestead works, but it creeps up 10% at a year as opposed to homestead only 3% at the max. And I won't go into homestead issues. There's other exemptions to be aware of too. Most of them are concerned with the single family home as a primary residence. Religious and school, we get that from time to time as well. But just be aware that there are some other exemptions that will affect the taxable value, not necessarily the just. So how is it set? Well, the Department of Revenue oversees all 67 counties, and what they mandate is the property appraisers use a computer assisted appraisal system. It's basically a computer. So if you're thinking a human is actually doing the analysis to figure out what your value is, they're not. The CAMA system is put in place to take into characteristic or take into the property characteristics, the legal characteristics of the property, the zoning, deeds, subdivision plats, physical, the building type, residential, commercial, industrial, what have you, economic things, construction costs, real estate sales information, rents, operating expenses and costs, and capitalization rates. Takes all that information, combines it in aggregate and based on what the property appraiser has told it to look at, and then they formulate a value. That value can be overridden, and it typically is for higher value properties. Sometimes the CAMA system just doesn't get it right. And quite frankly, if the CAMA system got it right all the time, I wouldn't be in business. I wouldn't have been doing this for 17 years, making a living doing it. But the CAMA system does have its faults, and it does get it wrong. So as I said before, if you got your tax bill or your trim notice and you're happy with the value, well, maybe. But there's other things you have to consider that you might not be considering. You still might have a chance at a reduction. So you should have an expert take a look at it. And if you don't like the value, well, the CAMA system got it wrong, and they often do. The cost and depreciation data that goes into the CAMA system, it's not as relevant unless you've got new construction. And the cost approach sometimes comes into play. I think the only time that I've had to deal with this is I did years ago in Palm Beach an oil tanker, a reservoir of an oil tank, and I had to do a cost approach with that. I mean, there aren't really a lot of sales of oil tanks, like the big ones on the ground. So we had to go back and do a cost approach on that. But otherwise, it's not as relevant unless there's new construction. And then new construction, it definitely is something that you want to take a look at or make the expert aware that you've got new construction going on. Where do they get their data? They get their data from all the public sources. So the building department, they'll get it from any kind of transaction that has occurred. So transfer of title, judgments in the court, foreclosure, things of that nature, mapping. So there's all the counties have a GIS department. And what they'll do is they'll look at the boundary lines, they'll look at aerial photography. And that's one of the reasons that people get caught. Happen today quite a bit. If you put a deck on or you put an improvement, you didn't pull the permits or something like that, they will examine the aerial photography of your property. And if they see the roof line change or they see a deck is put on that wasn't there before, they'll flag it and they'll have someone take a look at it and things of that nature. So that all goes into the CAMA system. It's always best to pull permits because you don't want to get caught with something like that. They also have sketches. So when the developer built the property, or if you built it, you would have turned in plans to the building department, and those sketches end up into the public record that is considered for the CAMA system. And they get it from also the MLS, commercial data. There's CoStar and LoopNet and other things like that where they'll get information from. They also, one thing to note, in March, if you've got a large multifamily property, you probably would have got a survey from Broward County or Dade. And the survey is going to ask questions about rent and expenses, and they're going to want information on the property to formulate their models for income approach. The one thing that's deficient that the CAMA system really doesn't get, they don't have a good handle on the income side. They don't have a great handle on expenses, and they also don't have a great handle on the rents. So that survey information they use. Now, whether or not you turn that in, that's something that you want to talk to your expert about, whether or not you want to do that. Let's see. So there's 3 approaches to value. I kind of alluded a little bit. You've got the sales comparison approach and the income approach and the cost approach. Cost approach, we're not going to get into because it's not real relevant unless there's new construction. The sales approach, Broward loves the sales approach, even for commercial properties, which is a bit odd. It's not probably, in my opinion, the best way to take a look at the property. But they love the sales approach. And with sales approach, what it is, your value set January 1st, 2025. They'll look at market transactions that occurred in 2024. They'll compare those sales to your property, and they'll formulate a value based on the comparable sales approach. The income approach has the most variables and is also the one that's most important in the value adjustment board process. The sales approach, look, if the comps are high and you're low, there's not a whole lot I can do about that. So if you're in a subdivision, that's just an example, a subdivision and the market sales are in 500,000 and you're assessed at 2, there's really nothing I can grab onto, unless the property burned down or something of that nature. But there's very limited things that your expert could do on the sales approach if the comps are there. The income approach, there's lots of things we can do. And I'll get into that here in just a minute. One other thing to consider on both approaches is the highest and best use of immediate future. And the best way I can illustrate this is the property appraiser is going to assess it not as to what it is, but what it could be, what the zoning would allow. So if you've got a single family home that abuts a large commercial shopping center and there's a zoning change, the use of a single family home is not the highest and best in the immediate future. So what they would do is they'd kind of discount the building. They look at that as development land and they would assess you as development land, not as a income producing single family home, which it is. So that's also something that's highly speculative, and the highest and best use in the immediate future, it has to be financially feasible. And that's one of the reasons that we can often make successful arguments is we can talk about the feasibility. You're assessing it at this rate, but there's got a lot of speculation involved in that sometimes, and that gives us some ammunition that we can use to our advantage. We talked about the sales approach, income approach. So if you're a sophisticated investor, you might look at internal rate of return or the net present value to determine whether or not an investment in this property makes sense. For property tax purposes, they do it kind of the old-fashioned way. I don't know if you're any brokers, but the old formula, and the formula is mandated on the cap rate. So if I know 2 of 3 variables, if I know what the asking price is, I know what the cap rate is, or I know what the NOI, the net operating income, I can derive value from the other 2. And what we attack here is the value. So I look at the NOI and I look at the cap rate. The cap rate, we've got some market information that we can use to formulate whether or not that's a fair cap rate to apply to this particular property. The NOI has a lot of variables that the property appraiser has limited information on, expenses being number one, and also the property appraiser doesn't know the intimate details of the subject property very well. So when you hire an expert like myself, what I would do is I would ask you a series of questions as to what does the property consist of. So if I ask for a rent roll as of January 1st, 2025, and I see the rents are substantially below market, well, I'll ask some questions. There has to be some reasons for that. It could be external obsolescence issues. It could be that the type of tenant that you're trying to attract in this location, maybe the location's changed and now you can't demand those kind of rents that the market would ordinarily dictate. I've had an instance where I've got a multifamily property and they had a fire in one of the buildings and 4 or 5 of the units weren't occupied. And they didn't tell me about this. I had to figure it out from the public record. Saw there was a fire and we got to actually take those particular units off because they weren't in service. But the property appraiser doesn't necessarily pick up on those things or know those things. So that's why if your expert asks for your actual income and expense data and your actual rent roll, it can be used to help your case and help fill in the gaps, but it is not by and large, regardless of what you're getting for the property, it may not be in the highest and best use, or there may be some other issues. So what you actually get does not mean that the property appraiser and the special magistrate, the judge in this matter, is going to take that into consideration. It's always market, but the actuals can help determine what the market is for that particular property. And let's see what else I have here. Also, the NOI, typically when you guys would do it for an investor, you'd factor in the taxes and depreciation, most likely. We take that out for property tax purposes. So a pro forma that we would do for the value adjustment board would look probably different than what an investor would have. But the county would do it the same way. And property tax appeal. So in the trim notice, you'll notice that at the end there, they gave you a date. So in Broward County this year, it's the 16th. And in Dade, I believe it's the 17th. Don't quote me on that exactly. Look at your trim notice for the exact date, but I believe those are the dates. Those are the dates that you have to file an appeal. The only way we can do anything for you is if we file an appeal prior to that date, and then we'll get a hearing sometime in the upcoming year. Hearings typically start in October, and they last anywhere between April and May. I've got no control over that. So if you, and neither do you, no one does. So if you file an appeal, you're kind of at the mercy of when the county schedules it. But to that end, you got to pay the taxes. So if you don't pay anything, you file an appeal, you will lose the chance to go to the Value Adjustment Board if you don't pay the taxes when due. Always, 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 doesn't matter what the value. We always recommend to all of our clients, pay the taxes as stated on your tax bill in November. You lock in that 4% discount. If we're successful in reducing the property, you'll get a refund from the tax collector. But that way you've got a 4% discount baked in, and you won't have any issue with going forward with the Value Adjustment Board appeal because you would have paid your taxes. Man, if you wait until the due date, you got to pay at least 75% of the ad valorem taxes and 100% of the non-ad valorem taxes. If you don't pay those amounts, you again would forfeit your chance to go forward on a Value Adjustment Board process. In the VAB process, that's how it's set up in Florida. All counties have it. Most of the time, what happens is the board's made up of a number of different people, citizens in the community, real estate appraisers, things of that nature. And what they do is they typically assign to a magistrate, which is basically the expert that they've hired a number of different experts to assign a value, whether or not they think that the value is fair or not. And then most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they will rubber stamp what the Value Adjustment Board magistrate says what the value is at the hearing. Some counties I've seen where they've overridden the magistrate, but that's pretty atypical. And in Broward and Dade, which I'm sure most of you guys are in, I don't think you'll have any issue. I can't say I've ever seen the Value Adjustment Board overrule a magistrate decision on that matter. The magistrates are appraisers in the community, typically experts in the field. Sometimes for the more complex commercial properties, they'll have a MAI appraiser or someone that's got a lot of experience in the commercial aspect. For single family homes and condos, they might hire a different appraiser, but we're equipped as experts to argue to both of them. The Value Adjustment Board process, after that goes forward, if you get a reduction and it's rubber stamped, you'll get a refund, or perhaps, depending on the time of the year, you might get a new bill. If you don't like that value, or in some instances, if we've convinced the magistrate to give you a really large cut, there's always the court of law. We can file suit, but so can so can the property appraiser. And we do see that. Now, the new regime in Dade, they have not been as litigious this year. Broward typically isn't as litigious. We do have filed some lawsuits for Broward cases. If we don't like what the Value Adjustment Board said, you do always have that right. But most of the time, I'd say 98% of the time, the Value Adjustment Board process is where you're going to get some relief on property taxes. And who should appeal? Everyone should have an expert take a look at it. But it does dictate, the value does dictate whether or not we can actually do anything. The way we make our living is the county has to be aggressive in the valuation, or there has to be some other things that they didn't consider. There has to be some leeway. If there's not fat on the bone, so to speak, there's nothing that I can really do for you. So properties that are under 500,000, they're probably, unless there's some very specific issues on the physical nature of the property, or if there's been some destruction of the property or something of that nature, there's probably not a lot I can do for you on a value that's less than that. I'd be happy to take a look at it, but typically most of the time under 500,000, there's limited things I can do. Above that, we might talk about some savings. Now, whether or not they're meaningful or not, it would depend on how aggressive the county was in formulating their assessment. Ideal candidates, newly purchased property. Anytime you make an acquisition, you should always have an expert take a look at it, because there are some legal things that we can take into account that might save you money that first year. Also, we want to check the exemptions and make sure that portability was done in a single family home context or condo or the like. So always on a new property, you want to have someone take a look at it. Properties that have substantially increased in value, and that may happen with a zoning change or something of that nature. You want to have someone take a look at it. All commercial properties should always be looked at because the income approach gives so many other variables that we can use to attack that value. Property has been damaged, said fire, flood, hurricane. We've been very successful in reducing property based on hurricane damage. So hopefully we don't have any hurricanes this year, but if we do, that's something that you want to have someone take a look at. And the year prior. So if there was a hurricane the year prior, you want to have someone take a look at it to see if the damage has been fully accounted for. And then this is mostly for the owner occupiers, but property owners that have lost their exemptions from one year to another, sometimes we can actually get that back. But that's kind of property tax in a nutshell. It's very fact specific and very case specific, but there are a number of things that we can do to actually save you some money, and we've been very successful at doing that. So I'll open it up. I don't know how much time we have left here, but I'll open up any questions that you may have or anything I didn't cover.
All right. Is there anybody that absolutely has to leave by 1 o'clock? So I would invite you to go
I'll be
first.
heading out, Alex. I have to leave by 1, but it's not a problem.
Okay, go ahead, Radmi. Do you
All
have any
right.
questions for Mr. McCarville?
No, not at this time. I appreciate it.
Okay, so Mr.
Sure.
McCarville, you are correct. I'm looking at my trim notice and it says my deadline is September 17th for Broward. If I recall correctly, there's an online process you have to go through to file the appeal. Besides saying that I'm challenging the assessment, do I have to supply some documentation with my application, or I just say I protest?
No, not really. They may ask you some of the questions, but what's relevant is you pay the fee and you file on time. What we do, if I was hired, we would do that for you. We'd file it. We charge a small filing fee, administrative fee, $60 to file an appeal. That's the only thing at risk. And most experts, there are some that would charge some hourly fees, but the vast majority of attorneys in this area are going to do things on a contingent basis. So the only thing you have to risk is the filing fee. But if you file on your own, you can also file it on your own, and you could possibly contact an attorney or an appraiser later to see if they can challenge it. But at the time of filing, no, there's really nothing that you need to do.
Okay. So as you recalled, you were the second person I came to challenge my assessed value. The first one was an appraiser who blew it because the comps they submitted were from the same year, not the current previous year.
See that a lot.
So
See that a lot.
what comps are you submitting as your rebuttal?
It depends. It depends on the type of property and whether or not we're really going to concentrate on the comparable sales approach. But as I said, the first of the year, January 1st, that's the assessment date. So and it was like every year they do this. So the most relevant sales for a change. So if your property value changed in value from 2024 to 2025, and let's say it's a single family home where the sales comparison approach predominates, this only sales that you really care about occurred in 2024 and maybe the first quarter of 2025, but it depends on the magistrate that you're arguing to. But definitely anything in 2024 for this particular year, that's what's going to be relevant for your assessment for this year, for 2025.
So they don't care about any assessments or comps from 2025. That's after the assessed date.
Well, like I said, the first quarter, maybe. It depends. There's case law out there that allows them to consider it, but if the assessment date is the first of the year, well, if you're an appraiser and you're assessing it on that day, you don't know what the future is. So the most relevant is what's prior to that day.
All right. So then it's not just comps, if I understand you, but there's the cash flow, the commercial value of the property, and also highest and best use. So is that on a case by case basis, which evidence you submit?
It is on a case by case basis, and we're going to highlight. We're looking in the light most favorable to you, because on a contingent basis, if you don't save money, we don't make money. So we're going to look in the light most favorable to the property owner. And sometimes we're going to highlight the sales comparison approach because we've got really good comps that would justify a reduction. Other times, the sales comparison approach might just blow us out of the water, and then we're gonna shift our efforts and really concentrate on the income approach. And the income approach, it depends on the commercial property, but if you've got 1 to 4 units, sales comparison approach is really going to be. It depends on the county, especially Broward. That's going to really dictate whether or not we can use anything else. On the income side, there's a lot of things that can come into play, and that is the approach that offers the taxpayer the best chance at getting a reduction. And again, the variables that go into the income approach are also prior. So the income and expense in 2024. And we may ask if we see something that's out of line, we may ask for 2023 and 2022, see if there's like a trend or something of that nature. But the expenses that I alluded to, on a case-by-case basis, the property appraisers are very blind to expenses. They get expense data from the surveys, but a lot of people don't turn those surveys in. And I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but that can be hairy with those surveys. So the market information on the expenses are something that they don't have a lot of information on, and that's something that we can really use to our advantage to get a reduction. And it increases or decreases the NOI, and if you do that, that'll equate to tax savings.
All right. So, Mr. McCarville, what is your fee structure, or what can one expect as a typical fee structure to hire a professional such as yourself to appeal your tax assessed value?
Sure. Well, like I said, the filing fee, $60. Some might charge a little more, some might charge a little less, but that's basically an administrative fee to file it right, make sure it's done. Because if you don't file it right, you don't get a chance. So that's very, very important. And then experts in the field, it depends on the party type and it depends on how much we think we can save, but anywhere between 35%, that's the top end, and maybe down to 30%. Maybe lower in some characteristic or some certain circumstances when you've got large property owners with a lot of volume, you might expect to pay a lesser rate.
So that is at 30% of the savings?
A savings, yeah. So if we save you $1,000, we'd bill you $300. But it comes out of the savings. I mean, the way to think about property taxes, I mean, they've kind of got a gun to your head. You must pay this or you lose the property. And if you hire us, well, maybe you pay less and we make our bones on what we save you. So you had to pay it anyway. You just might pay a little bit less if you have the expert, and the fee comes out of those savings.
So let's say that you are successful and you get the tax assessed value reduced. Does it pop right back up again the next year, or does it?
It can. Every year they look at the market, because the market changes from year to year. So Florida law says they have to, every year in the first of the year, they've got to assign a value. And there'll be different things that come into that, different sales. The market has trended downward on the single family home overall. I mean, certain markets are different, but overall things have trended down since the first of the year. So yes, if we get a reduction in 2025, depending on what the market does this year currently, and what the property appraiser puts on for 2026, it may be at the same rate that we got it reduced to, or it may be more or less, but it floats. What we do in one particular year doesn't really carry over. The exception to that would be on a single family home or a condo where you've got homestead. If we were successful in putting an exemption back on the property, well, yeah, that's going to equate to some savings from here on out.
All right. Lynn Ottomer, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is great information. So my question is to like piggyback on what Alex said. So if you get a reduction one year and it goes back up the next year, do you have clients that you represent them pretty much every year because that's what happens to them?
Yep, year over year. Yep. We and especially for the large commercial owners, we represent them year over year. It's always better to take a look at it, because if you don't raise your hand to challenge the taxes, you're going to pay as stated on the trim. You might pay a little bit less, but yeah, every year is a different year, and unfortunately for the taxpayer, they do tend to pop things back up, especially in Dade. Dade is pretty agnostic about what happened the year prior. They just put a value back on. A lot of it has to do with the camera system and how they have that camera system configured in Dade County. Broward, Broward is you may, if you got a reduction in the year prior, they may keep it at that rate. So they do tend to override a little bit more than Dade historically. It doesn't mean that's going to happen for your property, but yeah, year over year, in short.
This is
Did somebody else? Victor?
Yeah, quick question. Is there a fee for having you assess the property to see if there's any savings?
The only fee is it's the filing fee. And the thing of it is, if you call right now, and it's not just for my firm, but other firms, most of the time what you're going to get right now is a litmus test. And a litmus test that's, I don't know, back to high school chemistry, determines whether it's an acid or a base. But it just gives us a quick and dirty look to see if there's any impediments. Is there any reason why I wouldn't want to appeal? We don't have the time to get into the specifics of what we think the value is right now. That's just the volume that we have. We just don't have that kind of time. So the only fee right now would be the filing fee, and that's it. And then during the season, which occurs from October to May, that's when we'll have time, when the hearing is scheduled, to actually formulate what we think the value is.
Thank you. Mr. Ortiz?
yes. Wanted to ask you, do you work Palm Beach County?
Yeah, Florida wide. We work in every county in the state.
Okay. And did I hear you correctly? I was having a little trouble with my speaker here. Did I hear you say that you do both sales value estimates, or I should say evaluations, as well as the cost estimates of income versus expenses in the property?
Depends on the property type. Yeah, we'll look at all three approaches, and by law, the property appraiser also has to look at all three approaches. But there really are only two that are really relevant 95% of the time, and that's the sales comparison approach and the income approach. And we will look at both. But if it's a single family home that's a rental, it's income producing property to you, but the property appraiser doesn't really look at that. They'll look at that as well. You could sell it to a family that moves in. Rather than a rental. So the income approach on a single family home is not going to be relevant. In fact, we don't do it at all for single family homes. Duplexes, maybe. It depends on the jurisdiction, but yeah.
I have a duplex up there.
Okay. Well, the sales comparison approach is going to be 98% of where that value is derived from. The income approach, I mean, there's something really particular about that property, and if there is, that go into the sales comparison approach as well. Because if you're comparing duplexes that are of a certain stature and yours it has deferred maintenance or something of that nature, then we'd highlight that and adjust it on the sales comparison approach. But the income, we'll look at it, but again, under 4 units, not highly relevant.
Okay. All right. You're going to post your contact information here before we get off, correct?
I hope so. Great. Mr. Johnson, you've got my contact information. I mean, I can show you my card, but I don't know. I suppose if you want to get a hold of me, Mr. Johnson would have my contact information where you can get a hold of me and I can take a look.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Feldman, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I can hear you fine.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier, Mr. McCormick, but Alex tried to let me introduce myself, and I'm technologically challenged, so I couldn't figure out how to unmute. Anyway, I'm Dave Feldman. I am a full-time real estate investor, and I have a condo up in West Palm Beach that I appreciated lower taxes when I bought it 10 years ago. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to do some asset protection and hired an attorney to put it into a trust. And when that happened, apparently it triggered a sale. And so the property assessor's office reappraised it and raised the taxes like $300 or so. So can you handle a situation like that where
Unfortunately, no.
No?
That's a triggering event. So it's not a sale per se, but it's a change in ownership, change in entity. Now, if that was your primary residence and you put it in a trust and the trust has certain language, even though there's a transaction between you and the trust, it wouldn't have changed anything. But if you do an asset protection and it's not your primary residence, that change in title is enough under the current law. That's enough to trigger a reassessment. So no, there's really nothing I can do about that.
I appreciate it, sir. It's hard to know which attorney to listen to, though. I checked with another guy, and he said it should not have triggered a sale, that I should appeal it.
Well, if, like I said, and he may have thought in the context of that being your primary residence. And if that is the case, and that was his assumption, he may be correct. But if it was not, and this was an investment property, that would be a triggering event, because there would have had to been some transaction filed. You would have had to quit claim it, or there'd be some transaction in the public record to show that it went from ownership A to ownership B. And in that sense, that's a triggering event, and it would reassess.
Is it still worth filing an appeal just because I think they over appraised it anyway, just for the heck of it?
Absolutely, I'd take a look at it. Now, again, what I said about the values, if it's under 500,000, there's probably limited things I can do to create meaningful tax savings. I mean, it doesn't make sense for me to save you $50 and bill you 10, because it takes hours to develop that. But if it's over that amount, yeah, I'd be happy to take a look at it.
It's under that amount, but I appreciate the offer, sir, and appreciate the information. That was great job today. So thank you. Really good stuff.
Appreciate it.
Can you just say your telephone number over the air? Would that be okay if you do that?
Yeah. So telephone office number 305-517-1392. And extension, my personal extension is 202. So 305-517-1392, extension 202.
Yeah, I'm old school, so I write everything down. I got it in my notebook. It's not going anywhere. Thank you, sir.
Not a problem. Thank you.
All right, and everyone, I did put Nicholas's phone number and website in the chat. So don't forget to save the chat by clicking on the three dots before you leave the meeting. That way you'll have it. So, Mr. McCarville, you mentioned that if you are unhappy with the result, with the decision of the magistrate, you could appeal that in a court of law.
You can. Yeah, you can. And we've done that several times. Broward County, and again, I'm assuming that a lot of your investor group is in the South Florida area, Broward and Dade. Broward County is not as litigious, at least under Mr. Kiar. He's not as litigious. They don't often sue based on what we do at the VAB. Now, sometimes there's also, I didn't talk about this, but in the value adjustment process, there's a reconsideration that can happen sometimes. Again, you wouldn't be aware of it. That's something that the expert would deal with. But they don't typically offensively sue. We sue them, and we do sue them from time to time. But it has to make sense. You've got to have the right facts. You've got to have the right value. And it's not an inexpensive process. So the value adjustment board is a very inexpensive process for the taxpayer. Filing suit, there's got to be some major money at stake, and it's a long process, and it can be quite expensive. But can save substantial amount of money if the facts and law are on your side.
So how biased or unbiased do you feel the magistrate is?
Well,
I really felt I was fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, it depends. And the thing is, magistrates shouldn't be like this, but they do treat taxpayers that go to the board maybe different than experts that are in front of them every day. And we are in front of them every day. So they get to know us, and they understand what our arguments are and things of that nature. And they can be a little bit different to taxpayers that may challenge themselves, or appraisers or attorneys that don't do it very much. They may have a harder time. It's a very loaded question. There are a lot of magistrates. I won't say anything disparaging, but it does depend. It shouldn't, but it does depend sometimes on the luck of the draw. You can have the same arguments in front of the same person, in front of a different person, and get wildly different results. And that's just a flaw in the system. because the Department of Revenue is supposed to oversee this where it's fair and equitable for everyone. But unfortunately, there is a lot of discretion involved. Assigning value to real property, it's an art, not a science. And there's a lot of things that go into play. And you can make the same arguments, have the same adversary. The property appraiser is the adversary in the value adjustment board process. And it really, you can have the same people fighting it, and you can have wildly different outcomes based on the magistrate. And that's unfortunate, but that is what it is. And there's nothing I can do. I can't pick my judge, so I've got to go in front and make the best argument I can for that particular judge. But over time, you do know some of the tendencies and some of the arguments that hit home with that particular judge more than others. So that's another reason why you might want to have an expert do it, because they're going to tailor their arguments in the room. I mean, it's not something you do beforehand, but they will tailor their arguments in the room for the tendencies of that particular judge.
Well, I think that was a very good point, and a lesson I learned the hard way, which is not to represent yourself, but to hire an expert for a better result.
Yeah. Yep. That's very, very true.
All right. It's 1:15, so does anyone else have any questions? If you do, just unmute and go ahead and ask it. Tyler Field.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to know what the ROI is that the county uses to then extract your value, if you know that, or does that change? Is this what, 6% or something like that?
ROI, the return on invest. What do you mean by
Well,
ROI?
or I'm sorry, if you use the income approach, right?
The NOI, the net
Or
operating
NOI.
income?
I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, NOI. Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about the NOI, but what was the question about it?
So you calculate if you use the income approach, you calculate how much income you made in the year, and then they derive the value from how much income you made, right? Is that how they do it? Or
Yeah, and if you hire someone like me, we're going to ask for the actuals. We're going to see how the property actually performs. But that is not what Florida law says. So some states, some jurisdictions, that's it. California, New York, you supply your actual information, they're going to assess it based on what you're actually getting. But in Florida, you've got the highest and best use argument, and because or actually mandate, and because you've got that mandate on the highest and best use, we'll look at the actual and income and expense, and sometimes we'll share that with the judge, but it's done on a pro forma basis, another Latin thing, which means this is at market. And what we'll do is, if your market rents are $800 and they're under market for various reasons, and we can get into why that may be on a case-by-case basis, and we'll do that before the judge. But if the market rents in that area for that property type predominated $1,000 per unit, we'll use that as the prevailing rate. We'll take market vacancy, and then we'll look at market expenses, and we'll compare and contrast that with your actuals. And if your actuals are substantially higher than what the market typically indicates, well, that means there's something with the property or something with the property owner. It could be, or if it's dramatically less than what the market is. So we have some big REITs and some big industrial owners that biggest in the country that will have expenses less than market. And the reason they have that, economies of scale, things of that nature. So you look at both the actuals and then you look at the market, but Florida law says that the value has to be determined at market. But the market, like I said, it's an art, not a science, and you've got data. And the thing is, it's an adversarial process. The property appraiser has data and data they highlight, and we'll do the same. We'll have different data and different data to highlight. And it can point to the same thing, or it can point to vastly different values. But that's why you have an expert doing it. And that's why it's an adversarial process. And there's a judge that actually determines, okay, what is the most relevant data for this particular property?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Dan Hers, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Nick, I'm just curious, all other things being equal, do you file more cases in a rising value property market or in a declining value property market?
There's really no difference. We can make reductions in either case. So as far as actual raw filing numbers, no, it doesn't really matter. We don't see any difference. Whether it's a rising market or declining market, if it's a rising market, you're going to see the county be a little more aggressive in their values. If it's a declining market, they might not be as lax enough. They might not lower it at sufficient levels, but it doesn't affect the raw filing numbers as far as how many people we challenge.
Okay, thanks.
All right, are there any further questions? So if not, Mr. McCarville, I'll ask you to reintroduce yourself since I started the recording 5 minutes into your presentation.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, Nicholas McCarville. I'm an attorney at Property Tax Adjustment and Appeals based in Aventura. Phone number 305-517-1392, extension 202. Our website is www.proptaxadjust.com, proptaxadjust.com. And you can find my email is there, my email there as well. I'll tell it to you. It's nmccarville as my last name. So N is in Nick and then McCarville. And then at that root, proptaxadjust.com.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for attending.